whoever's listening to the first in a series of short, casual discussions that's going to be brought to you by the TAPPI Young Professional Division, better known as the TAPPI YP Division. So we've informally named these discussions perspectives, and their purpose is really to highlight the necessity of skills that we've deemed as soft in the workplace. So during this time, we want to take the time to sit down with an experienced professional within the paper or any of its allied industries, that have been recognized for their leadership skills, and discuss the path that they took to develop those soft skills that they have now, as well as how these skills that they have shape their current management styles. With members of the YP division moving into a lot of leadership roles, leadership focused roles in recent years, the millennial manager, as I like to call it, has never really been so prominent in the workplace. So we at the YP division hope that these discussions prove useful to you and give you the confidence to finally apply for that management role that maybe you've been holding out on because you don't know how to lead. So without further ado, we're going to get started. So my name is Garrett Fisher. I'm a YP in my own right, working within the paper industry. And I'm sitting down with a man that I'm very familiar with, Mike Subilia. So say hello, Mike.
How you doing, everybody?
So Mike currently works as the senior process engineer and CI leader at the Domtar paper mill in Port Huron, Michigan. And he's actually a past recipient of the TAPPI Young Professional Award. Formerly, if you might recall, it used to be called TAPPI 30 Under 30, but isn't that correct, Mike? You were a recent recipient of that?
Yes, I received the TAPPI Young Professionals Award in 2019.
So you're in good hands with this interview, guys. So as you may be able to tell, Mike and I are very familiar with each other. We'll say we're old coworkers, right, Mike?
If I have to.
So Mike's worked in a variety of maintenance, engineering, and recently leadership positions that really shows where he's been able to develop these soft skills and how they come into play in his current life. So I'm not going to bog you down with details. We'll get right into it. So Mike, my first question is a pretty obvious one. What's the biggest obstacles for YPs getting into management roles right now? And do you have any advice for them?
So one of the biggest obstacles, obviously, and you can't ignore it, present time. We're doing video conferences, we're doing webinars, we're doing more of this stuff because of obvious impacts of the global pandemic of COVID-19. So that is going to pose a challenge in how we come out of this as an industry, and as a nation. That's going to play a role, obviously, going forward. But as I was thinking about this question, one of the things that comes to my mind when it comes to getting a management role or receiving a new job is it comes down to kind of the eye of the beholder concept. It's where you define what a management role is. So do you define a management role as somebody who has direct reports, who's leading a team, who is directing a day-to-day thing, or do you define a management role in a different way? So for me, as I reflect back on all the different positions I've held, throughout, one concept comes to mind is that I've always been a manager in the sense that I have projects that I'm responsible for individually that drive the company I work for forward, that impact the bottom line and ultimately impact the business success for the corporations that I've worked for. So that piece is something to reflect on, is where you define that management role. Now, if it falls to defining it as having people report to you, I think that in the short term, it comes down to practical experience. It comes to gaining some and learning how to lead a team of people. That is something that there may be schools out there, but I'm not familiar with it. When I was in school, there wasn't courses on being a leader in the engineering field. That wasn't part of my schooling. It wasn't part of my degree to build me into being a leader. I was built to be a technical engineer. So I think that piece is kind of the early thing you need to work on, right? So if I was going to give somebody advice on and they're looking to progress quickly into a management role where you are reporting, or have team reporting to you, or you're kind of directing day-to-day operations, it's to take the time to go out and develop skills on having people follow you and work with you. Because ultimately, as a leader, the biggest and best thing you can do is have a cohesive team that works together fluidly. And being able to build that and bring that out in people is probably the earliest challenge in getting into a management role and being that lead.
Yeah, we hear it time and time again that, the primary issue is that in college you're not taught that. You come in with all these technical skills, but you don't know how to lead with people. And I like how you took that question. Pretty much build on your skills now. Don't wait until you have a management job. You can be a manager when you're not a manager. You have projects, lead them. I really like how you took that question. So we're going to get into another one here. So I think everyone really wants this answered, because if you work in really any industry, this isn't just a paper mill phenomenon. This is anywhere you go. How, as a leader, do you change the "this is how it's always been done" mentality? I hear it all the time when I bring up a new idea. Well, we've always done it this way. How, as a leader, do you change that?
So that's a challenging one, because I struggle on the fence of we have to move quickly when it comes to changing things, but at the same time you got to take your time. So when it comes to changing a mentality of something that's always been this way, it shouldn't change. There's a lot of things that come into play, and one of the concepts that I always fall back onto is the fight or flight issue. And so when you try to change something that's been some way a long time, the immediate response is to try to continue the way you've been going, because your human instinct, your instinctual brain is telling you that you've survived this way, right? We have been prosperous, we've made money, we still have a business, and you're coming in to try to change something. So some of it is outside of maybe the conscious control of the person you're trying to work with. So it comes down to being patient, recognizing that, and then trying to convince them, show them the why, right? Simon Sinek talks about why, how, what, and the way you communicate. Talk to them about the why, and really take the time to think about the why for the person. There are multiple whys for any type of change you're doing, from something that impacts the guys on the floor to mid-level and upper-level management. You need to talk about the why. What are the benefits? Why are we doing this? The hows and the whats can come later. It truly is important to make sure people understand the why we want to do this, why it's important, why is it influential, why is it impactful, and then taking the time to show people how them supporting this change and helping to be a true driver of this change, a champion of the change, can allow them to impact the long term. It shows them the impact of the business. Making sure you tie that back to show them that they're just not a cog in the wheel. They are important to the success long term of the organization they're with.
Yeah, I guess you could say make them feel like they're the engine of the change, not just a driving component. They're the actual drive for it. And I get it. You come in with like an environmental project and you say, hey, this could reduce our emissions by 5%. That's going to matter to people up top and environmental folks. But guys that are going to be doing maybe the project on the floor, the operators, they're going to say, I need a little more. So I like how you kind of come up with who's your audience, figure that out and come up with the whys. I think too many people just say, this is the why. I'm going to deliver that to every single person I see. And yeah, that's definitely sometimes not enough. So I like how you took that.
Yeah, and then before we move on to maybe a further question, that's a very good point. You hit on it, is you got to know your audience. And you need to adapt your message for the audience you're speaking to. That has to change. Part of being a leader is being able to adapt to the people that you work with. Yep. If you try the one way is the only way approach, you will lose part of your team, part of the people you're working with, because they don't connect with that, and that's important.
I totally agree. So we're now going to shift our focus more into, your journey to management and how you currently manage people, because that's a big component of what these talks are going to be about. So, looking at how you've journeyed into your management role, what are one or two, they can be technical or soft skills that you actively tried to develop in your early professional career that's helped you to get where you are right now?
Yeah, so I've been fortunate. A lot of what I've been able to gain is through the the leaders that I've worked with. I've had several very strong mentors throughout my career who have taught me things, or they have provided me an avenue to learn and be successful. Right out of the gate when I first graduated, and when I was just an entry-level process engineer, I was with a Six Sigma organization. So I immediately got thrown into Green Belt Six Sigma, and that stuck with me throughout my career. So that's a technical set of skills that I've honed. You know that I'm a Six Sigma black belt now. I have been for quite a few years, and that's one of the skill sets. Now, whether you're a Six Sigma black belt or not, I'm not sitting here to preach that that's the only way, but having a data-driven approach, taking the time to learn to do thorough data analysis, I think is one of the technical skills that has allowed me to be successful. And then soft skills, they're tough. There's a lot of them. There are so many that you can work on. But one that I know that has been an active piece of my career is getting to know people. It's taking the time to go out and talk to different people, from the guys on the floor to the people that work above me and work with me, my peers. Take some time out of my day just to get to know them at a level that's more than just work. Know something about them. What's their ideal weather? Do they like wintertime to go snowboarding? How can I connect a little bit so that every time I talk to them, it's not about work? I don't like to see the look on somebody's face and they know I've got to ask them to do something. So I've always tried to start off, you talk to them as a person, try to be on a personal level with them. That's an important soft skill, I think, that is one that's good to work on. It tends to be relatively easy, especially at the start. I mean, if you're brand new coming out of school and you maybe, like me, you're living in a different part of the state that you don't know anybody, you've got no one, and so outside of work, your social interaction is limited. It's kind of easy to go and try to have some of that. So I think it's something I've definitely worked on throughout my career, and I continue to work on and pay attention to because I think it's so important.
Yeah, I agree. Friendship bonds are always better than coworker bonds. I mean, you're always going to lean towards getting stuff done for your friends more than your coworkers. I mean, that bond is just stronger. And you never want to be the guy that goes up to an operator for the first time and says, hey, can you do this for me? It's not going to start off you on the right foot, or, really anybody. You want to have built that, professional relationship up before you just go right in and say, hey, can you get this done for me?
Yeah, and so the role I play now is when I was throughout my career, I've been more of with one crew or in a smaller area for the majority of my other stints in different roles between maintenance or when I was a process engineer at the other Domtar mill I worked for. And I was in a defined area most days. And my current role, there are multiple machines, and my projects are a little bit more high level. Plus, I have a team working with me who are driving projects on a focused machine of their own. So right now I find it's even more critical for me to get out on the floor and talk to the operator so that when I show up, it's not me showing up only when there's a problem. It's showing up, they know when I'm coming up that I'm there either to help, or maybe I do have, I want to help out with something they're working on, or maybe I'm just stopping up to see how things are going and to check in and give them a chance to ask me for help they may need that I don't know about because I'm not directly involved with that department.
Yeah, so you hear that, everybody that's listening to this, I know a lot of us might be engineers or really technical people, but get out there, talk to people, not about work. It'll pay off in the end. I'm telling you, I've made the same mistake in my life, but make sure you get out there and talk to people. I'm sure Mike can vouch for that. But we'll get it. Now that we've started to talk about your management style, we got a couple questions for you about that. So, I'm pretty familiar with your management style, but for everyone that's not, when I worked with you, you were a huge proponent on reading books to develop some of those soft skills that we talk about a lot and, where you could improve with them. So what book have you read that has had the biggest influence on your management style?
So I think you know the answer to this question already, but the book that I've read and I go back to quite frequently is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. If it's not that one, it's Why, How, What by Simon Sinek. Those are the two books that I tend to fall back on. But Extreme Ownership I like because there's a lot of relevancy. that I think they talk through, and the examples when they go to the business aspect are pretty decent. There's mixed reviews, and it's not for everybody. It is about Navy SEALs, so there's a lot of kind of a military focus to it and things like that. But what I like about extreme ownership and what works for me is that when I am in charge of a project, when I am in charge of a team, when I am the person who is kind of at the focal point of it, I am responsible for the actions and the outcome of kind of the entirety. And that works for me. It gives me a little bit more ownership, and it allows me to communicate a little better to everybody I work with the role they play in the outcome.
Yeah, I do remember reading that book. It was one of your first suggestions to me. And yeah, it is very military focused, but the concepts in it, honestly, I've read a lot of self-help books, a lot of soft skills, and you just don't get it. You know, it's not there to sell you anything. It's really just, it points out, you know, skills that you don't really see in other books out there. You know, it's interesting. And I would say for everybody that's maybe not a reader, maybe you say you don't have time. Well, guess what? A lot of their teachings are also on this podcast that they have called the Joko Podcast. Highly recommend it. I drive an hour to work every day. I don't have a ton of free time in my days anymore with all the driving I do. And I get around to that. It's a great way to get that information without having, you know, to sit down for an hour a night reading a book, because some people either they don't like that or, you know, they don't have the time for it. So highly recommend doing wherever you go to get your podcast, download that one, listen to a couple episodes. Anybody will tell you it's better to listen to an hour a day of, you know, self-help podcast than listen to the same song on the radio or the same news or whatever you're listening to on the radio. I'm sure that it's not going to be as helpful as what you might learn from the podcast for an hour a day. I'm sure you'd agree with that, Mike.
Yeah, and I was just thinking as you were talking that, you know, the book in itself is, and I want to say there's 8 chapters, but there might be more. But the one that I find that I always refer back to the most often is the chapter on ego. It's one thing that I do talk a lot about with various different people. One of my passions is leadership, and I like to talk about leadership because it's one of those things that it's different for everybody. But the journey is kind of what develops you. So that chapter on ego is great, and I'm going to mention one more book for you, even though you only asked for one. When I think about ego, there's another book that's not strictly driven at leadership, but it's driven about ego, and it's called A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. It's a total different direction than extreme ownership, and if you read them both side by side, you'd sit there and go, man, that guy must be nuts. But to me, they tell the same story. That chapter plus A New Earth, that really hits home for me, and I use that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you've always been a very, I guess the best word is emotionally focused leader. You know, you care more about just the person, but more about the well-being of somebody. You know, you really take them under your wing. That's really, you know, I don't get a lot of managers that are that personal, you know, with how they manage individuals. And I think what you were saying about the ego part, probably the most Mike quote that I can ever remember you saying is, check your ego at the door. Don't bring it into a meeting. You know, if there's anything that Mike can tell you right now is that if you host a meeting, if you hold a meeting, if you're going into a meeting, check the ego at the door. Don't be the guy that says, hey, wait a second, I want to throw out my thoughts because I think you guys are all wrong. Listen to it, provide answers when you're given, but don't be that guy. You know, check the ego at the door. Mike's always said that, and it's very, very helpful information. You know, you don't want to be the smartest person in the room, as they might say.
You don't have to be.
So we'll move on past that one to another one about your management style. So again, we talk about how you run a very, you know, tight-knit group. You care about individuals more than just you know, more than them just as people, but you know, you truly care about them. So you run a very tight-knit group based on, you know, most of the time, trust and ownership. So what are the 3 core principles that you preach to, you know, your team members that will make them successful?
There's a lot of them, and I'm gonna try to stick to 3. I'll probably come up with more as I talk. I've learned over the years that the more I talk, the more I think, and the more ideas come to me.
Yep.
So we'll see where we end up. I know you're sitting there laughing because you know it's true. So we'll jump back. You mentioned meeting style. So one of the things that I find that I was taught very, very early on in my career. I can remember the conversation with my very first boss. We were talking. I had just run a trial meeting. One of my very first trial planning meetings. It was for a dry strength additive in a paper machine to try to help increase Z-directional tensile. Right now, we start talking technical for those folks out there who want to hear technical things. And I was leading this meeting. I was brand new. I was just out of college, and the meeting didn't go well. I didn't come out of there with what I needed. People were having side conversations. It went poorly. I didn't get what I needed. So my boss pulled me aside even later that day, and just said, "Look, you know, one of the things you need to pay attention to as you're leading meetings, particularly something where you're trying to get the group you have to provide information, is you need to be in control of the meeting. Come prepared to be in charge of the meeting." And I know I've said it to you, and I think I say it to anybody that I feel will value the information or could improve from it, is that when you set up a meeting, make sure you run it. Come prepared with an agenda, know what you need to get for information, and be prepared with where you can let that float, because you don't want to be strict and, you know, this is a meeting and we're going to go piece by piece. But at the same time, if you pull a meeting together for a half hour, you really want to try to be done in 20 minutes, and then you can give people time to get to their next meeting. They can have some of that free-witted conversation, and you walk away with everything you needed to be able to actually move forward. If you don't control the meeting and your meeting goes the full half hour or 45 minutes, or you run over, you not only have wasted some folks' time, but also you might have to pull another meeting together very soon after to try to get the rest of the information you needed. And that gets frustrating. And that just takes 15 minutes before the meeting to put your thoughts together and be prepared. If your meetings are back-to-back, some days like mine are, maybe you got to plan ahead the night before, or you got to be prepared to start your day off with an hour session of preparation. But that's probably one of the key concepts. One of the next ones that I think I'm working on still, again, leadership is a progression, but providing an environment, a safe environment for people to try things, to take risks. So I try to get my team to be able to make decisions on their own. It's one of those things, and I know I've said it to numerous people I've worked with, is not making a decision when someone's asking you for what to do. Not making a decision is still making a decision to do nothing, right? And that to me is something that at the core is that in the moment, we've got to be able to make decisions. And that can be a challenge. It really does. That can be driven by your environment and the culture you work with. If it is one that you're not comfortable to have, you know, a failure or to make a wrong decision, that can be a challenge. But with my team and with the folks that I work with, one of the things that I try to hit at is just make a decision. Let's do it. Let's keep going. Let's try. And then another one that I've kind of brought more into my discussions with folks as we start talking about decisions is something that I actually took away from somebody who I interviewed for a position. I was interviewing them to come join my team, and one of the things they said to me was, the comment was, you need to fail fast, or you need to try things fast, because it's easier to find what doesn't work than it is to find the one thing that does. So go out and try stuff, right? That's another concept, is just go out and try stuff. If it's minor, you know, most of us have spent a decent amount of money on college, decent education, and if we're at the point where we're let on our own to be of our own mindset, and we're out there on the floor, people trust that we can make some educated decisions. So take a look. If the risk is low, if the outcome is maybe not so hazardous, maybe you can give something a try. Maybe there's something small you can do, and you work with an operator one day, and you guys come up with a plan, and you try something out. The faster you try different things, the faster you'll find out what doesn't work, and hopefully you'll stumble across what does, or at least you'll be learning as you go, so that you can progress towards that solution and continue to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, you've always been a guy built on trust. I mean, that is what you preach to your team day in, day out. I want you to trust I want myself to trust that you can make this decision. I don't want to have to follow up with you. I trust you. Make the decision and own it. It's that extreme ownership you talk, about all the time. And if I could give our listeners the probably 4 things that Mike would recommend the most about a meeting, they're really, if you follow these 4, you'll probably have a successful meeting no matter what. It's kind of like a pre-meeting, a during the meeting, and a post-meeting. Pre-meeting, make an agenda. Please make an agenda. During the meeting, start off with a set of rules. Make sure everyone knows like what's allowed, what's not allowed. It might be kind of kindergarten-ish at first, but you can word it in such a way where it doesn't seem such a way. So, primal, I guess you could say. So, get a set of rules out there. After the meeting, send out an action item list. A meeting without an action item list might as well have never happened. People are, Mike laughs because he knows, but people are just not going to do things if you don't assign it to people. I mean, our nature is, nobody told me to do it, so I don't have to do it. So send out that action item list, just like you sent out the agenda items. And the 4th one is kind of, you kind of got to search for it, but, know the audience that you're sending this out to. Just like when you bring up a topic, know who you should invite to the meeting. Know who's going to be helpful. You don't have to have a meeting with every single department in the whole plan because it's not going to be effective. There's going to be too many opinions. People who might not need to be there might not need to be here. So make sure you vet that out. Bring the people that are going to be helpful to the meeting. Don't just bring them because they're, the lead of a department or because they are, a leadership group. Make sure that they have value to the team that you're bringing in to solve whatever problem you're trying to solve. And those are probably the 4 meeting tips that I could give that I know Mike has given me, and following them makes it so much easier, especially when you have 20 action items generated in a meeting. You need to organize that because it's not going to get done if you don't. I'm sure Mike will agree with me on that.
No, and it's true. There's a lot of little action items that can get dropped if they're not captured, if they're not assigned, if someone doesn't have it on their plate to do. And that is part of a project leader to manage that. That is part of project management kind of 101 is capturing those action items and making sure they get finished. And so we said 3, but I've got a 4th. And the fourth thing is
a little bit more.
I do. It's like I said, you got to drive to the finish. It's so easy for, and this comes down to scope creep and things like that. Projects like to balloon, they like to get bigger. People like to bring in more stuff. The nature of it, and as project manager, you gotta maintain that and try to drive that stuff. Keep the scope where it started, but take that project to the finish. So if you go through any paper mill, and I've been in 4 or 5 that I've actively worked in, and I've been in a few more in my time, and there are always systems you walk by. Well, what was that? Oh, that was this project so and so many years ago, and eventually we stopped working on auto, so we put it in manual, and then eventually it broke and it didn't affect us, so we just left it there, right? There's so much of that, and there's so many projects that kind of got started that never got finished. And then what happens is we bring in young process engineers, or we bring in someone new to the organization, and guess what? You get this project that's been handed over and it's been handed back. Maybe you worked on it on your internship, and then you came on full time a few years later, and you got that project back because it stalled, because it didn't get carried to the finish. So taking something to finish, define what the end is. Where is the end of that project, and get there.
Yeah, I think the hardest part for anybody who ever does a project, and I've been guilty of this myself, is the demanding process, that C, or the S, the sustainability piece, whatever you want. There's a million acronyms out there that you can say, but that last step, how do you make sure that what you've done stays that way in 10, 15 years when it's changed hands 3, 4, 5 times? That is the hardest piece of any project. It's not getting there. It's not getting people to buy on, even though that sometimes can be hard. It is, how do you make sure that this flows fluidly through several owners and doesn't get lost in the weeds? It can be as simple as, an example is when you set up like a fire extinguisher inspection program. How do you make sure that that inspection program is going to follow suit for months afterwards? You don't even have to think about it. Think about that throughout your whole entire project. Because if you don't set up those things, your project's going to fail. And it's just going to be one of those things on the side of the road, in a mill, in a plant, wherever it may be, where people don't use it because it failed and nobody knows what to do with it or who owns it. So what Mike says is spot on. That last part of any project, the control, the sustainability piece is huge. Absolutely. So we're getting to the end, but I'm going to squeeze in one last question here because I think, you know, you're a wealth of knowledge, Mike. But we're going to end this more on a philosophical note, you know, to really get anybody who's out there. Yeah, I know it's going to be a big one. We're trying to get our you know, listeners to think, you know, about, you know, what their tactics might be when they become a leader. So this is a very philosophical question. But what has the power to do more good, a great leader or a great team?
So I've pondered this one a bit, and I still always come back to it's the team. In my opinion, it is always the team. A leader. So there's so much here. I'm struggling to put together the sentence I want to use. At the end of the day, one person cannot accomplish the same of a collective team of people who are engaged, who know the goal, who have the trust and the freedom to work within their space. One person cannot be more successful than the whole. I have been fortunate to be a part of several teams that worked fluidly together. And, you know, if you think about a sports team, right? A sports team isn't held up more often than not by one single player. It's the cohesion of all the players. You know, you've watched either individual games where a team just has it, right? And I grew up playing hockey. I love hockey. And one of the things I love about hockey is when you play with the same 5 guys and a goalie, you tend to know where each other is. You know where that person you're making the pass to is. It becomes instinct. It becomes nature. You don't have to tell that person to skate there. They know they're going to be there, right? So a team, I think, can always accomplish more when inspired and trusted to work together, when expectations are set, when the goals are clear, and when the why is properly communicated. In those instances, a team will shine, always.
I think your answer really highlights, you know, something that, you know, our listeners don't know about you, but I know very well, is that you as a leader know that your success is driven by the success of your team. As a leader, you look bad when your team looks bad. You know, you need to own that. I mean, ownership, as you've already indicated, is huge for, you know, you as a person. So understanding that, but on the flip side of that, as a team, it is your job to make your leader look good. It's that whole checking the ego at the door. Don't be the guy that tries to, you know, blow the doors off. You know, your job, you know, part of your job is to support your leader, and vice versa. Your leader understands that their success is driven by you. You'll get your opportunity, just as we said, work on the manager skills that you know, when you're not a manager. But that's kind of the, you know, the give and take, I guess, that I know that I've kind of, you know, drawn from my experiences.
Yeah, I would just caution that not everybody on the team, it's not necessarily the team's number one focus should not be to make the leader look good. As a leader, if you are doing the right stuff, if you are encouraging and engaging and creating the environment for your team to succeed, you will look good. So it's not always necessarily the team's job to make you look good, but at the end of the day, the outcome will be there.
Yep. Wisely spoken, Mike. So that's really all we have time for. You know, I and the rest of the YP division would really like to extend our thanks to Mike for, you know, agreeing with his very busy schedule. I mean, he is a very popular guy, if our listeners don't know. But, you know, we would like to thank him for sitting down with us today. So, you know, on behalf of everyone at TAPPI YP, thanks, Mike. You got any last words of advice or just food for thought for our listeners?
So first off, thank you, Garrett, for having me. I think you've led a fantastic meeting. You do listen. Look at that.
Learn from the best.
Yeah, leadership is my passion. I could talk all night about it. One topic that we briefly touched on is setting expectations, and that's something that needs to be got to be paid attention to, setting the proper expectations for, and setting the goals, knowing what the goals are, making that clear. It's very important to success long term. It's very important to being a good leader. On top of that, obviously, this is a TAPPI hosted function, and I'm going to give a big shout out to the TAPPI team. I have been a part of TAPPI now for almost 10 years, if I don't include my student membership when I was a student. I've gotten more active recently with PIMA on my volunteer side, but I've always paid attention to the YPs. I'm still technically a YP for a few more years. But I've always been more on the technical side, but now I'm more in the PIMA side, and that's because I like to talk leadership, and I like to be a part of that. And one of the most invaluable things I've gotten from TAPPI is a network. I mean, between TAPPI Connect and the PIMA group that I work with, and the program committee for PaperCon, and the network at PaperCon, I can reach out in an instant to a network of thousands of people who've been in this industry for anywhere from 3 days to 40 plus years, who can answer questions, who are willing to support and help. And that I wouldn't have without TAPPI, without my membership to TAPPI. I wouldn't have had those opportunities, and I wouldn't have the network that I have. And that's been a key to my growth, is having a wealth of resources to lean on, as well as ways to get engaged. We talk about developing as a leader, and before we move on from this, and then I let you end this thing, I've been doing PIMA program committee for PaperCon, what was to be PaperCon 2020. And it was a wild ride, because I'm used to being able to be face-to-face with people and talk to people one-on-one, and really I work better with being able to have the nonverbal cues, and that's really important for my communication style. So it's been a challenge to try to learn how to lead a group of people whom I have maybe met in person once or twice, who I don't work with on a regular basis, and it's been a great opportunity for me to grow as a leader, to work with a bunch of very experienced, very knowledgeable leaders throughout the industry, and be able to develop myself further. So I highly encourage trying to get involved, whether it's at the YP level or to be in PIMA or even TAPPI technical. I mean, there's a ton of things you can get involved in. I highly recommend it. I really do.
Yeah. So, Mike, speaks about getting involved. So, a year ago, I really wasn't that involved in TAPPI, hardly at all. I knew about them. I had been a member as a student, but I really didn't do much with them. A couple months ago, I decided to get back involved, and here we are now. So I encourage anybody. It's really easy. If this has motivated you to maybe get involved with, TAPPI in any way, head to the TAPPI YP division website. Look up some of the leadership divisions emails. See if you want to get involved. It's simple as sending out something or an email to one of them, and they'll get you on the right track. So with that, we certainly hope that everyone that's been listening, gains something from this, whatever it may be. And we look forward to providing you with some more of this content in the future. So thanks for listening, and we hope to see you again soon.